There always comes a point in any campaign where you have to assess what were the aims when you started this campaign, what is the end goal, where are you in that on that roadmap, what can you do to help get you to that end point, and what have you done so far to get you where you are. And in terms of PR at the moment is in a very, very good place on its roadmap. I think it is very, very possible within at least maybe the next 2, maybe 3 parliaments, we will be able to get PR. Now, of course, that's technically like a 15-year period, but when you are trying to push for something like this real change, sometimes you have to take that long view. And this is not to disparage people thinking, oh my God, we've still got years away till we get PR. Bear in mind, PR is at the forefront of more people's minds than ever before. Even going all the way back to 2010, when we had the referendum on AV, which was our probably the first chance in a long, long time to actually change the voting system here in the UK. So be under no illusions that it could happen in the next parliament. It could. We'll have to wait and see. But PR as a campaign, as a movement, has never, ever been in such a good place before. Like I said, even going back to the referendum, the AV referendum years ago. So we are in a really good position. You've got the Lib Dems and the Labour Party both really pushing for this. But particularly when it comes to the Labour Party, this was not always the case. As I've said before, when we first started this push for PR, it was laughed at and said, you will never get more than 80 local Labour parties, or at least the local Labour Party organisations, to pass a movement for PR. As of at least today, we are well over 300 plus local constituency Labour parties voting and pushing for PR. That is amazing. People's awareness of PR and what proportional representation is higher than ever. And I've said before, there's this time now for the campaign to transition of not just pushing awareness, but what type of PR to implement and how this will make a difference to the UK. Now, of course, that does obviously go under awareness as well, but it is time to start to get more and more now to influence more of the Labour MPs. Because just a couple of years ago, you only had a very, very small handful of Labour MPs pushing for PR. But now we have more Labour MPs ever wanting to back PR and wanting to back that change. So it is important that we do, and we are today going to take stock of where that is in the Labour Party. And in particular today, we're going to have a look at the front bench of the Labour Party. Just obviously, if Starmer gets in at the next election, very often the push for PR, it is important to have these people in the front bench who are going to make part of the leadership team for PR to be pushing for it. So here we are. So we're going to go over to Yorkshire Bylines to have a look at how proportional representation is looking on the front bench and who do we still have to, give that bit of extra push to, and who else can we support on the front bench for their push to have proportional representation. So, as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, over we go to the Yorkshire Bylines. with the title of "Is the Labour Front Bench Coming Over to Proportional Representation?" I joined the Labour Party in East Surrey, and whether you vote Labour in East Surrey, it really doesn't count for anything. Keir Starmer said last week in the New Statements Politics Live conference when asked about proportional representation. Starmer went on a little rant through his normal, Starmer then went on, to rattle through his normal talking points. The next election being fought under first past the post, and his focus will be on the economy. But the sentiment was by far the most positive of which the leader to the opposition has espoused in many months. Similar comments have come from otherwise antagonistic frontbenchers. In recent days at the Local Government Association's comments, the shadow levelling up secretary Lisa Nadley said that there are real problems with first past the post. Meanwhile, the previously sceptical Ed Miliband came through with a wholehearted endorsement of the electoral reform on the Guardian's weekly politics podcast, saying, "Our system is unfair, disenfranchises people, and I do not think it actually contributes to progressive change." So, what is remarkable about these statements is it is not just their quick succession, it is they're from Labour MPs who were lukewarm on PR beforehand. In the Shadow Cabinet, which on whole has been very reluctant to talk about changing the voting system whatsoever. And that is important. As we've said, you can have campaign groups, but unless you get to a point where you're getting MPs to speak up on behalf of your campaign group in Parliament, or at least getting MPs to back you, you might as well, pack up and go home. But we are at that point now. We are getting more and more MPs on our side. And as we've said, we've got some what were very lukewarm MPs who hadn't really talked about this before, or before had dismissed it in the past, are now in favour. So more and more, we have to get that to change as well. And that is certainly what has been happening, which has been good. But now we have to sort of push to get more. So anyway, it continues. So what has changed? For one thing, it seems that electoral reform is an issue which is simply not going away. While the motion to adopt PR was defeated at last year's conference, Labour's two largest unions, Unite and Unison, have since voted to support it as a policy. Couple that with the 80% of the constituency Labour Party delegates who voted for last year's motion, and it's overwhelmingly likely that this year's conference will vote for PR, which is what we want. So if we can achieve that this year, that will be fantastic. So anyway, it continues. What's more, Labour's route to majority government looks difficult at best. Polling expert John Cusey estimates that Labour would need a 12-point polling lead for even a narrow majority, which only one poll this year has shown. While Labour is empathetically ruling out a coalition with the Scottish National Party, relying on the Liberal Democrats is their only obvious route to power. And Ed Davey's price for a supporting coalition has been an open secret for a long while, and confirmed by Kevin Maguire's Commons Confidential column, is electoral reform. The final factor may well also be that a snap general election has become only more recently likely in weeks. Several spectres are looming, including the Privilege Committee investigations, Johnson's misleading statements in Parliament, the tanking economy, and to more backbench rebellions. Whether this strategy is to call an early election before things really go downhill, or jump the sinking ship and leave it to Captain Hindsight, the case to go to the people is a stronger one than it was a few months ago. For the perspective of the Shadow Cabinet, this gives multiple reasons to be more flexible to electoral reform. The first is that PR is even more popular among Labour activists base than the public at large, and whenever you want local members to reselect you, campaigners to canvass for you, or even a broader membership to vote for you as a leader after an election, the incentive is to go with the party mainstream on PR. What's more important, in target with constituencies with even more moderately high Labour Democrat or Green votes to support electoral reform can often persuade third-party voters to lend a candidate their support. particularly for frontbenchers like Miliband. In a suddenly marginal Doncaster North, wooing over these voters may very well become the imperative. The need for candidates to support PR has been broadly reflected in the selection of progressive parliamentary candidates in Labour's target seats. Whispers from those watching the selections is that the current batch of PCCs are more broadly pro-PR yet. With an 80% of the membership in favour, it is unsurprising that candidates are more likely than ever to be either generally pro-PR or moderate their opinions, to be in line with the rank and file of the activists. This is clearly filtering up to senior levels. Whatever the case, whatever the winds are, they are increasingly in favour of the Labour Party shifting towards PR. But only time will tell, and hard campaigning cannot go on within and outside of the party, whether this can be happened by the next election. So that is the really strong case now. We have to continue pushing, we have to continue campaigning, and we can't stop now. Yes, as I said at the beginning, PR is in a more fantastic position with 80% of your local, the groups and organizations that make up the Labour Party wanting PR. Obviously, the reason why it couldn't be passed at the last conference was that those two big unions, Unite and Unison, were unable to meet because of obviously the pandemic and weren't able to talk about positions they wanted to pass. But now two of the biggest Labour unions supporting PR have said, we will back PR. Will the other unions fall in line? It's highly possible. That might be where we have to sort of campaign next to get the other, shall we say, rest of the unions online in supporting this. But the fact we've got Unison and Unite are big positives. So hopefully at the next Labour conference, we will be able to get PR. And it is very, very likely at the next general election, it will be a hung parliament. And it is very likely, as was said there, Starmer will go into coalition with the Lib Dems. And of course, what will come out of that? It will be changing the voting system to proportional representation. But as I've said, we now have to focus on what type, because we cannot allow it to go to, oh, well, let's just have AV, right? Let's AV, guys, No one voted for that because no one wanted AV. AV is not a particularly good PR system. It's basically the first past the post system of PR. I've said before, I think the direction we want to go is that single transferable vote. And of course, one of the big arguments that we're already hearing about PR is people are afraid of losing their MPs. But as I've said before, there are other people out there from other countries who have proportional representation. I guarantee you out there, they have representatives. You can keep your MP. You may be under, depending on what system we go for, you may end up with more than one MP. The other thing that we must push for is reforming the House of Lords as well. Get rid of it completely and make it an elective body and have that as a regional representative group. Like have it like rather than the House of Lords, have it as like the House of Regions. That will be a fantastic step forward for the House of Lords as well. Reforming that will be amazing. And that is what I also hope the PR campaign also needs to bring up as well. Let's not just talk about reforming the House of Commons voting system as well, the House of Lords as well, because when you ask people from different political backgrounds, a lot do agree, of course, with reforming the voting system at Westminster. But overwhelmingly, even in the Conservative polling as well on this, the House of Lords reform and turning it into an elective body polls incredibly well. So that is something I would love the PR movement to actually have a look at and start talking about as well. And how this is going to work, because it's fine pushing for PR, but there comes a point where you actually have to start laying down plans, laying down the groundwork. And that's what we need to start doing now, preparing if it does pass and we do get it, let's say the snap general election happens, and it happens in I don't know, November. Starmer wins with that coalition of Lib Dems, and it goes, we're going to change the voting system from first past the post to proportional representation. Well, what are we going to do? What version of PR are we going to do? We can't let people dictate. We have to start putting forward what type of system we want in terms of proportional representation. That is where the movement needs to start really identifying and really start building up. So with that said, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, down below as well, there's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the YouTube subscription button, where if you subscribe to the channel that way and support me that way, you get all sorts of little bells, whistles, and what's nots and who's it's and things as well. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.